right, well, good evening and welcome to Morocco by Motorcycle. Who here is friends with me on Facebook? Most of you. Okay. So, assuming you spent as much time on Facebook reading the stuff that I spent time posting, you will have seen a good amount of detail about our trip. I'm not going to duplicate most of that. I hope you enjoyed the stories. I hope you felt like you were with us on the trip. We tried to share a little bit about our experience day to day as we went through. But,
We were worried about you.
pardon me?
We were worried about you.
You were worried about me. Okay, well, I appreciate that.
More anxious than you.
Well, so what is it that we did? Angela and I got married and decided that we were going to take our honeymoon in style, or at least a style. And our style was to ride motorcycles through Morocco. And so from late March to late April, we took a month, and we rented some motorcycles, and we went and explored through Morocco. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Kingdom of Morocco is in northwest Africa. There is 36 million people in this country, which is about 70% of the size of BC. So you'd think it'd be pretty densely populated. In some parts it was, but as you'll see, there are a lot of photos here where there's nobody in the picture. We started off in Porto, northern Portugal. This is where we rented the motorcycles from, and you'll learn why later on. And we quickly made tracks south through Évora, where we stopped and went to church, through Seville, down here to Algeciras, and then we took the ferry across the Straits of Gibraltar into Morocco. We made a counterclockwise loop, went to Rabat, which is the capital, Casablanca, where the Hassan II Mosque was, you just saw that, Marrakesh, out to this tiny village, Zawiya al-Hansal, through the Dades Gorge, out to Merzouga, where the western edge of the Sahara Desert is located, up through Eritrea to Fez. We saw Volubilis, where some ancient Roman ruins are located, Meknes, back up to the coastline of the Mediterranean, El Jebba, Chefchaouen, Tangier, back across where we then bolted up through Gibraltar, Seville, Monsanto, beautiful city, has nothing to do with GMO. Through the wine region here of Portugal, rated as one of the top 10 motorcycle roads in the world, and finally into Porto. Now, why did we choose to do this? Well, Angela and I love riding motorcycles. We met, if you don't know, at a Christian motorcycling event, and I will be retiring soon, thankfully. And when I retire, our goal is to travel the world by motorcycle. We've set aside 10 years, and we're going to travel as far as we can, leapfrogging from mission project to ADRA project to orphanage to whatever project we can find as we travel around the world. And so this was a test run for us, where we could try out some things that we'd read about, but we wanted to see how they were going to work. This, for example, with the exception of helmet, jacket, and boots, this is all that I took. Angela had a similar pile, and it all fit into one 90-liter dry bag. So we wanted to try out our packing. We wanted to try out what it was we were carrying to see if it would work for us. We wanted to try and see what the pace was going to be like, and we wanted to try out the motorcycles. We did have to fly with a little bit of gear, and it was fairly easy for us. They let us take our helmets as carry-on. Angela had hers in a little duffel bag here. Nice bright jacket and the big motorcycle boots. If you remember Angela's motorcycle boots? Yeah, exactly. So she had those, and I had a pair slightly larger. I was in the airport, and somebody asked me if I just come from Comic-Con. So this is how we traveled. So, what did we learn? One of the big unknowns was the motorcycle itself. We currently have a couple of adventure motorcycles. They're 12 years old, have a lot of mileage on them, and we're looking to replace them. And when we replace them, we're looking at replacing them with the bikes that will be our long-term travel bikes. And so we had been looking at a motorcycle that Honda makes, the Africa Twin. It's 1,000 cc's, 2 cylinders. And according to the specs, it looks great. According to the people who own them, it's great. So we decided we were going to rent those bikes and drive them for a month and see if they would be the motorcycles for us. Here, we discovered very early on in the trip that I had some issues with my chain. So while in Rabat, I stopped. I couldn't find a motorcycle dealership, but I did find a Renault car dealership. And this fellow here was kind enough to loan me some tools, and so I was out in the parking lot adjusting my chain, trying to do a little bit of maintenance there. Very kind fellow, wouldn't take any money for the loan of his tools, and we were off. But we didn't get very far. We got to Casablanca, and I decided that the chain was in worse shape than I'd originally suspected, and it needed to be replaced. So driving down the road, we were on our way to the Medina, and we saw a sign for Honda. Pulled over, went in, was able to buy a new chain for the bike, and it was only a parts shop. They said, go to this guy. And so he helped us find this storage locker, basically is what it looks like. And this is a good example of not judging a book by its cover. The guy that runs this shop here did an absolutely fantastic job. Turned out that he was one of the top motorcycle mechanics in Casablanca, if not all of Morocco. And so my concern when I started off quickly faded. We watched a Yamaha Super Tenere pull up, a Gixxer pull up, a Harley pull up, all to get serviced by this guy. While he was waiting for one of his workers to do some work, he was showing me pictures on his phone. He owns a big BMW touring bike, so his shop does servicing of expensive bikes, and he did a great job for us, and so my fears were allayed as he got the chain replaced, got me all set up and good to go. So that was fantastic. Got that taken care of nice and early. As far as the bikes go, this is one of the things we learned. These motorcycles are great. They've got tons of power, comfortable at speeds far faster than you want to hear me talk about, and just lots of features as long as you're going faster than 10 kilometers an hour. Once you're going a little bit slower, the 500-pound beast is a little bit hard to manage. And so one day, we were coming out of our accommodations, and there was a sharp turn on a gravel road down a steep hill. Angela wasn't confident. She said, oh, well, here, you just take my bike, which I did, until I got to the first corner, and I dropped it, and I put all the scratches on the engine guard, which did its job fantastically. But one of the other things we learned is plastic saddlebags are terrible. So this one fell over at a standstill and still smashed the bottom corner of this bag here. And so here I am with the duct tape I bought, trying to seal it up so it wouldn't get wet as we drove down, thankfully, very few rainy days. So we decided that as we progressed with the trip, that maybe this wasn't the best bike for it. It was a fantastic bike, but at 500 pounds, maybe we need something a little bit lighter. So we're looking at KTM 690, 790 maybe. They're between 50 and 150 pounds lighter. And we're certainly looking to get away from cheap plastic luggage. So how is the food? Well, you can get French fries and salad anywhere. Fortunately, we didn't get stuck with French fries and salad too often. And fortunately for us, language wasn't very much of a barrier. There were disturbingly way too many people who spoke English, which certainly made things easier, but took away some of the specialness of the trip, unfortunately, I felt. But my French is pretty decent. Angela can get by with some of her French, and most of the people we came across spoke French, so we were pretty fortunate. Although, despite here, I would think most people in this room have a pretty good idea what vegetarian means. In other parts of the world, vegetarian sometimes means something a little bit different. So, had to be careful what you were ordering and watching the menu. And sometimes our options were limited. Everyone has their own kind of tastes. There's a camel head there and other bits and pieces of various animals. Now, so in order to help, aside from having some language skill, which worked, I made this little tool, which I put in my wallet, and it was a card. And on the one side of the card, it showed all the things we didn't eat, the big red cross through it. And on the other side, a bunch of the things we did eat with a big green check mark. And I had to pull this out a few times. We were in one village that nobody spoke any French. It was a Berber village, and they spoke the Berber language. And this helped us out a great deal. So this worked out for us. And in the end, we didn't go hungry. There was tons of food. In fact, that was one thing we found is they were very generous. I don't think we finished hardly any meal with the amount of food they put on our table. We did enjoy the tagine, which I think is the national dish of Morocco. You may have noticed, those of you who are reading my posts, that I was generally disappointed with the food. I was kind of hoping the food would be a little bit more good, I guess. Yeah, well, it's spicy even. Half the time it felt like just boiled vegetables. But these two tagine dishes were particularly remarkable. This one here we had in Merzouga on the edge of the Sahara Desert. We had this cook. He was 6'4", 140 pounds and cross-eyed, and he could cook like nobody's business. And this was easily the best tagine we had. Very close second was this one here. Angela and I took a cooking class in Fez, and we learned how to make this, and we learned how to make harira soup. And so we brought the recipe home with us, and we've tried it at home, and we've almost been able to replicate it at home. So that's really good. There were other options available. This was what we had in the village where there was nobody who spoke any English, all Berber. Tons of food, simple stuff, deliciously prepared, tons of fresh vegetables. We didn't see very much in the way of fresh fruit, but there was tons of fresh vegetables. So salad every day, no issues there. And if you couldn't find anything else to eat, there was always olives. In North America, there are two types of olives, green olives and black olives. But everywhere else in the world, here especially, all kinds of variety of olives. And we had olives served with us, I think, at every meal. Even at breakfast, we had olives. And so we were able to sample an olive oil. Man, the olive oil you buy here tastes like water compared to the olive oil we were able to enjoy over in Morocco. And not only olives, the other thing we got to enjoy at every meal was bread. Now, there was lots of different kinds of bread. And this is one thing I've learned, is no matter where you go, each country, each culture has their own specific kind of bread. And here, no exception. This turned out to be my favorite. This is called msemen. If you've ever had paratha, it's kind of like paratha. But if you haven't had paratha, think of like a burrito shell and cross that with a croissant. So it's flaky, almost like pastry. It's oilier than is probably healthy. You serve it hot, and it is absolutely delicious. So, and it's cheap. This is like what the average person eats. You can run into the market, you can grab these. I ran out sometimes for breakfast to grab a couple and bring them back to supplement what we were eating. Msemen is great. We did not, because of the quantity of food and the food that we did enjoy, did not lose any weight on this trip. But this is one thing that I found fascinating. Bread. So people didn't often bake bread in their own homes. They would make the dough in their homes, and then they would take it to the community bakery. And so this guy here, that was his job. He had this big brick oven with a fire underneath, and people would bring their dough in, put them on these little trays here. He would put them in the oven when there was room, bake it, bring it out, stick it over here ready to be picked up, and the ladies would come in, because it was invariably ladies. They'd come in, pay their money, and take their freshly baked bread home. And so that's how they would do it. And here's Angela enjoying some harira soup, best soup we had on the trip. Now, what's up with the beds? We booked most of our accommodations through Airbnb, and we did that because we wanted to have the experience of living in homes of the locals and enjoy the local culture, meet some local families, and get that kind of experience. And we did, and it was fascinating. We had a really good time meeting the people. Their homes were comfortable. The people were hospitable. They weren't as, they weren't the same kind of homes you would experience here. Often they were a little bit more humble. And they certainly, without exception, had no heat. Now you'd think, Morocco, it's Africa. Africa's hot, right? Well, no. It was kind of chilly. Where we stayed here, this is in Zawiya de Hansal, what you don't see is we woke up the next morning and there was frost on our motorcycles. What you can't really appreciate is that these windows, when these close, all they do is provide us a measure of modesty. There is absolutely no ceiling on there. The temperature outside was the temperature inside. What we did have, though, were blankets. And there were tons and tons and tons of blankets. You want more blankets, they'd give you more blankets. And we cover up with enough blankets that we were warm every night, as long as we stayed in the bed. But the beds, unfortunately, were rock hard. I don't know, it was like a Moroccan tradition or something. They were hard, like it almost felt like there was a wooden board in the bed. And so we would often take half of the blankets that we had and put them underneath us as a measure of padding so that we could survive. But wake up and you had like a bruise on your hip and bruise on your shoulder. It was not very comfortable. Everywhere we went, though, despite some concerns, so Morocco, although it's in Africa, they don't consider themselves Africans. They consider themselves Europeans, maybe because of the French and the Spanish influence from having occupied their country in recent times. And so the amenities in the homes were pretty decent for the most part, and despite fears, they all had plumbing. Now, they didn't all have toilets in the sense that you know them. There were often these little squatty things here with buckets. You'd pour water from the tap into the bucket, and then you chuck that down the hole, and that's how you'd flush. But almost invariably, with rare exception, like about 50% of the time we saw these, but about 90-95% of the time there was toilet paper. So that's a good thing. Always pack toilet paper. But we did, after one especially set of hard days, stop, and we did get ourselves a nice hotel that had heat and a toilet and down duvets, and it was very comfortable, and it was very nice. So, what was the riding like? Because that was a big part of why we went. We wanted to go and do some riding. And in a word, my word anyway, is awesome. I'm not sure what word Angela would use. Some of which probably can't be repeated here. You know, it's funny. This trip brought at least one of us closer to God. You see, we have helmet comms, and so we would talk to one another. And on some of the harder roads, Angela wasn't talking to me. She was talking to God the whole time. Oh, God, please don't let me die. Please get me through this, Jesus. It was, I don't know. Anyway, some of the riding was beautiful like this. We had some incredible scenery. We had some wonderful highways, not so many of them, but this was a really good example. Trees down by the lake, beautiful, warm, sunny day. Sometimes the roads were in less good shape, but still lots of scenery, nice and beautiful. Sometimes the roads were kind of narrow, and we especially traveled through some towns and villages where we had roads like this, and especially if they were wet with cobblestone, that added a little bit of sport to what we were doing. Sometimes we rode through canyons, lots of rock, just absolutely gorgeous going through some of the gorges. We crossed the high plains. We crossed the Atlas Mountains 3 times, and we crossed the high Atlas Mountain Range 3 times, and we crossed mountain ranges total of, I think, 6 times, between the high Atlas, the mid Atlas, the Rift. Yeah, we were up in the mountains a lot. And in fact, So here we traveled through villages. This is actually the road going through Zawiya de Hansal. Very narrow, one car at a time. But this isn't the narrowest. There was one day we took a road, and it went through several villages, and the road was probably 8, 10 maybe feet wide, lined with houses. And, you know, grandma would be sitting in the doorway of the house, and the kids would be playing in the streets, and there'd be chickens and goats and donkeys and, like, cow. Yeah, it was just narrow. We felt like we were driving on somebody's front lawn or somebody's front path, but that was the road going through town. And then here's us traveling through the high Atlas Mountains. We got up to elevations of 9,500 feet. Now, to put that in context, Mount Washington is 5,200 feet. And so here, when you get up that high, well, obviously there's snow, despite the fact that you'd think Morocco would be warm. And so one of the things we learned, yeah.
Did you get altitude sickness?
No. Altitude sickness normally doesn't kick in until a minimum of 8,000 feet. It's one thing we were concerned about, but 9,500 feet was close enough to the 8,000 that we were fine.
I got nosebleeds. That's one thing I noticed.
Yeah, so Angela had some nosebleeds a few times, but that was pretty much it, I think. Aside from the fact that, especially up in the mountains, it was cold. And so one of the things Angela learned was pack warmer clothing. Angela wore everything she brought and some of the things I brought, all at the same time, just to keep warm. So we actually, when we traveled, you may not have been able to tell from the pictures, but we both traveled with mesh jackets with the expectation that it would be warmer than it was. So we wore mesh jackets with the ability to put a rain layer over top and warmth layers underneath, but we obviously didn't bring enough warm layers. So that was one of the things that we learned. But the best day we had, or at least the most memorable day, was when we rode from Imilchil down to Boumandades through the Dades Gorge. Now, this is the picture that people will show you of the Dades Gorge. And this is awesome. This is beautiful paved road with some switchbacks coming up this hill, and it is incredible. And we rode this road. But this is 3 of the 160 kilometers we did that day, that 8-hour-long day. This is what they do to suck you in, is they show you a picture like this. The reality is a little bit different. So we started off with the moonscape, where at times you could barely tell the difference between where the road was and where everything else was. And it was literally this populated. There were 3 of us. Angela, me, and if you look closely, there's this little black dot here. That's this kid. We'd be driving out in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't see a house or anything, and there'd be people just out in the middle of nowhere. And so we stopped here to take a break because this is pretty tiring riding, doing this. And this kid came running. And he ran, and he ran, and he finally caught up to us. And he wanted some water, and he had these 2 50-euro-cent coins that he wanted to exchange with us for Moroccan dinar. And so we were going back to Europe, no problem. So we exchanged that for him, we gave him some water, and off he went. But people just out in the middle of nowhere, and I haven't figured out why. But so this is the early part of the day. This was probably the best of the road that we had up until we got to the paved section that you saw earlier. And if you look closely, you'll see Angela is standing. When the road gets rough, it's easier to handle the motorcycle when you actually stand up on the pegs. You can balance the weight better, you can control the bike better. And so we spent most of the day standing. But this was still pretty good. Beautiful scenery, nice vista, but what you can't appreciate, and you know, this is one of the things that we really regretted. Of all the things that we could have changed on this trip, aside from maybe bringing warmer clothing, the number one thing we regretted not having was a helmet camera. Because there were times when we would have loved to have been able to take pictures, but it was just unsafe to stop. And so this here is a poor representation. Here are roads here, and roads out here, and down here. And we had to snake back and forth on loose gravel roads with tight hairpin switchbacks that were a car width wide. And we descended off this mountain 2 hours in first gear standing up with almost nowhere to safely stop. This was the second time that I dropped a bike. Going around one of the corners. I wasn't able to negotiate it, and I laid my bike over and cracked my luggage case as well. So we did this, and then we finally got through. We got to the end of the day. We're getting up to our Airbnb. And, well, this is the road. It ends here. And this is the driveway that comes up here. And that is all uphill. And so Angela got about here, and she decided she was done. So I drove my bike up and then went back and got her bike and parked it up in the garage, and then we went and we relaxed for the evening. And then the next morning I drove both bikes down the hill again, because that was at the end of an incredibly tiring day. Beautiful riding, but it was easily the most challenging riding we had done, either of us, not just on this trip, but in our entire lives. But so wherever we went, the scenery was spectacular. Ascending and descending through the mountain ranges, we enjoyed a full spectrum of landscapes. We saw fields, we saw trees, we saw lakes, lots of mountains. We saw monkeys up in the mountains near Ephraim. Ephraim. It's like being up at Whistler, or what's the place in Colorado? Vail, yeah. It was a ski resort. And it was like a high-end ski resort for people with money. They had a private airport and a helipad, and it was super nice. But just on the outside of Ephraim, they had a national park that had wild monkeys. And since we didn't stop, you don't have any pictures, but you can trust me, they were there. But the scenery was absolutely spectacular, including when we got to the desert. And we got a chance to get out into the Sahara Desert, and Angela collected some sand to bring back with her. We saw camels. It was fantastic. Now, what about the people? So as awesome as all of that stuff was, it was the people that left the greatest impression upon us. Now, the number one question we had when we told people we're going to do this trip, aside from why, maybe the number two question was, is it safe? Right? And I think it's fair to say that there wasn't a single moment of any day of our trip in which we felt any concern for our safety, at least from dealing with people perspective. I mean, some of the roads are pretty scary, but from dealing with the people, we had absolutely no problems. And that was incredible. Everywhere we went, the people were very helpful, they were friendly, they were kind, they'd go out of their way to help you out with whatever you needed. We'll get to that, but I'm glad you noticed. So, what about the church? This is a church we attended here in Évora, in Portugal. And you know, the world is so small. This lady here, she knows Pastor Estevez from Rest Haven. And when we went in Porto, we went to church. They knew Pastor Estevez, and they knew Pastor Graça. You don't know him, but he's a pastor I had when I was out in Halifax. And maybe there are only like 2 Portuguese pastors that have left Portugal, but they knew him. It was pretty funny. Now, I have traveled to almost 50 countries and 6 continents, and one of the things that I find important to me is I like to be in church on Sabbath. So when I travel, that's one of the things I do, is I look to find where is the church. And I planned the trip around being able to go to church. And that's one of the things that we planned our trip around, is where is the church, where are we going to be on Sabbath, and who are we going to spend it with. So when I started planning the trip, started looking and realized this was not going to be an easy task. You know, you go to the SDA main church website, you go to the directory, and it lists all the churches all over the world. But there isn't a single entry for Morocco. Started digging deeper, and I discovered it was probably, I don't know, something like 20 years ago or something. There was a change in government or something happened in Morocco, and they went out, and from what I understand, they seized all the church property. And so the church has no footprint in Morocco. The church does not officially exist in Morocco. Now, you and I both know that that's probably not entirely true, at least unofficially. And so I kept digging. And the internet is awesome. I found this old website that someone had put up and probably has been neglected for several years that had a few names and some contact information. So I started reaching out on WhatsApp and email and Facebook and started hunting these people down, trying to find them. And when I was able to finally get a hold of some of these folks, nobody was willing to help me. Now, to put it in context, you need to understand that Morocco is a country that is 99% Muslim, the majority of whom are Sunni Muslim. Judaism accounts for only about 0.2% of the population, but it, along with Sunni Islam, are the only two religions recognized by the Moroccan constitution as native to the country. Christianity makes up less than 1%, and most of the Christians in the country are foreigners. And Christianity is considered to be a foreign religion. It's not technically outlawed, but Christians do often face a measure of discrimination. It's illegal to evangelize. It's illegal to own a Bible in Arabic. Muslims are not permitted to enter churches, and non-Muslims are not permitted to enter mosques, with the exception of the Hassan II Mosque in Casablanca. Leaving Islam, if you're a Muslim, leaving that faith is not an easy option due to social persecution. We had met 3 people on the trip that had done that. One of them we met was exploring Christianity. He was working with one of the missionaries that was in Morocco. But as far as his parents and his friends were concerned, he was still a faithful Muslim. We met a second guy who had decided, based on his experience with the faith, he was going to leave his faith. And his wife is not Moroccan, and she's Buddhist. He hasn't decided on Buddhism, but he had been exploring Christianity. And we gave up our entire evening to sit down and chat with him. And as part of that, we were sharing our faith and our experience with Christianity to help him along in his journey. And the third fellow we met was a younger guy who had also given up his faith and was actively worshiping with one of the Adventist groups. But, again, wasn't telling anybody, as far as anyone was concerned. He was a faithful Muslim. And you'll see a couple pictures here in a moment. He was one of the people that actively insisted on not being a part of any of the photographs, because Christians in Morocco have some concerns about their safety and their security. So the few people that answered me all directed me to this one guy. And so I got in contact with this one guy, and this is the guy. He is the official representative of the church in the country. And it's through him that all the other activities are coordinated. And even he really didn't want to help me. I had to sell him on us. I sent him links to sermons I'd done on YouTube and like a resume almost of my involvement with the church. I had the pastor get involved. I had the BC conference get involved in sending, bona fides for me. And eventually he said, okay, you're legitimate. We'll give you some information. And he fed me some information, gave me contact information to the leaders of the groups in the various towns, and connected me with them so that they knew I was legitimate. And I could then talk to them and start to get some information about where they worshiped and how I could connect with them while we traveled around. And so in one city, we met a couple that was sponsored by a university in Latin America to come to Morocco and work with the students in that community. Most of the Adventists in Morocco are students from other countries, And there are a lot of people, especially in Africa, who send their youth to Morocco to get an education. And so the Adventist youth in this town were being ministered to by this one couple, and he was helping to strengthen their faith and to teach them how they could share their faith and witness safely. Another city we went to, we met a couple that were doing missionary work using the health message. Another city we went to, there was a pastor there from West Africa working with a missionary couple from Adventist Frontier Missions, ministering to Adventist students in that community. And in yet another city, we worshiped with a group that were all students led by the students themselves. They had put their own group together, and there was nobody from the outside that had come in and was leading them. And so, in fact, I even had the privilege for Vespers in Marrakesh being invited to speak to the group that evening, which was pretty funny because they asked me, I said, okay, well, they worship in French. The main languages in Morocco are French, Arabic, and Berber. And in the far north, there's a little bit of Spanish. And so I asked them, well, do you want me to speak in French and you translate into English, or do you want me to speak in English and you translate into French? And they preferred that I speak in French and they translated into English. So I was able to do that, and every once in a while I'd correct the English translation guy. And had that opportunity. I felt privileged to be able to share in that platform. But there was a general concern that they all had about their security, and that's why their faces are blacked out, because I know this is being recorded and put up on YouTube. And I've invited all the folks in Morocco to tune in and watch tonight. So hopefully some people get a chance to see this. And as I said, a few didn't even want to have their pictures taken. And I reflect on this experience. It's not the first time I've been in a country where Christianity wasn't welcome, but this experience in Morocco reminded me about how privileged we are here in Canada to be able to choose to worship in pretty much any fashion we want, to have a building to be able to come to and make as much noise as we want, sing and have the windows open and let the neighbors hear it, and it's no big deal. And so I want to offer to you, next time you feel on a Sabbath morning that you're undermotivated to attend church, please consider the Christians in Morocco and those elsewhere who risk a lot more than inconvenience to attend worship service each week. And when you pray, I ask that you remember those around the world who put themselves at actual real risk when they declare Jesus to be their Lord and Savior. After our time in Morocco, we headed back up to Porto in northern Portugal to return the motorcycles, pay for the damage, and spend a few days with some special Canadian friends who also retired. They retired last year and are now traveling the world, and who, it just so happens, are in Morocco today. I think they left Gibraltar yesterday, the day before, and are now in Morocco. So, that's my presentation, and I'd like to open the floor if anyone has any questions. Fuel.
Was there lots available? How did that work out?
So, of the 4 countries we were in, Spain, Portugal, Gibraltar, and Morocco, Spain was the most expensive. Portugal next. Morocco, the fuel was pretty much, well, I say the same price as here, but here has now gotten more expensive. Fuel is about $1.40 a liter in Morocco. And we, always concerned about that, we looked to make sure we stopped every time we got to about a half a tank of gas. And we had no issue finding fuel. We never went more than 160, 180 kilometers between fuel stops. And we always watched. Every time we saw fuel, we would note it on our odometer, so that way we knew how far we could go before running out. And once we got to the halfway mark, theoretically, we could then turn around if we didn't find fuel. But fuel was very easy to find. Even in the most remote locations, we were never that far away from fuel. The bikes kept running. So, yeah, we put higher test stuff in there just because well, a couple of reasons. One, the fuel was all labeled in a manner that made it difficult to determine which was diesel and which wasn't, and which was what. And the way they calculate octane ratings is different outside of North America than inside North America. So we were putting in what they called 95, which was probably about 91, based on how we calculated here in North America. So never had a problem with fuel. And by refilling when we were at half tank, even if we got some bad gas, it would mix in. So that was one of the other things we were keeping in mind.
Well done, Nadine. Hold that thought.
Well, what about in the switchbacks and in that gravel pit area? And you said that you traveled there for 8.5 hours. So was there fuel stops all along someplace along this arid switchback trails?
Not at all. But that whole 8-hour day, we covered 160 kilometers.
Oh, I see.
But that's because we were driving Angela, it made me laugh. Every time we'd actually pick up in speed, she'd go, "Welcome back, third gear." Because unlike here, where you can drive at 120 kilometers an hour all day long and cross the entire country, there were days when we were averaging 40 and 50 kilometers an hour. On this one particular day that in question, we spent hours in first gear because it was just, you couldn't go any faster. And going downhill, first gear helped to provide a measure of braking as well, so we didn't overheat the brakes as we went down the hill. So yeah, there was no issue with fuel there. We were able to get fuel at the far end once we got into Bumandaris. And driving with less than a full tank of fuel also meant the bike was a little bit lighter. Oh my. You can take the Harley. I'm going for a lighter bike.
Now, Michael, as you were going through the countryside, did you see how the people did things like wash clothes and things like that? Did they have a local well that they washed everything at and hung them on the roofs, or how did they do that in Morocco? How did they do their washing and stuff?
Oh, Angela wants to chime in here.
I can address that just because of, being a domestic person. It was amazing to actually see people washing their clothes in a river. And I have never actually seen that before anywhere that I've traveled. And so we'd be driving through this town, and I'd be looking at a group of people thinking they were swimming in this river. No, the women had carried their laundry down to a river, and there they were washing it. And the people that we saw were always well kept. The Berber women were slightly different looking than the Arabic women. They were wearing, brightly colored fabrics, in their dresses and their headdress, and they all looked very clean. So it was interesting to see that.
That's how the washing in the river was quite common in South America, in Bolivia, particularly amongst the Indian native population in Bolivia.
In the homes that we went into, you didn't see a dishwasher. Very rarely would you see a washing machine. A hot water tank was sometimes rare as well. It would be a very small tank, maybe 25 gallons or something, set aside on the side of the building. They would go and turn it on if they thought somebody needed hot water, and then they would turn it off after. It was very, very modest living for anything outside of the major cities, all the villages.
With the exception, I think, maybe of one location, nobody even had dryers. So when you laundered your clothes, they would all get hung up on the line. And so when we had opportunity in some of the homes, we would take advantage of the washing machines, but we didn't have that opportunity all the time. And so one of the things we had done as part of our experiment was I bought a dry bag. And the idea was you'd throw your underwear and your t-shirt and your socks and whatever in there, fill it up with water, throw some laundry soap in it, close it up, throw it in your luggage, and you'd bounce down the road for a few hours, right? And so there's your wash cycle. And then you'd pour the water out and you'd fill it up and you'd shake it around and That'd be your rinse cycle, and then by the time the end of the day comes about, you can hang it up wherever you get to. It didn't work as well as I thought it would. Dry bags are far better at keeping water out than keeping water in. And so at least the dry bag I had leaked, and so it wasn't as good as we had hoped. So,
What was the mechanization like in their agricultural industry, you know?
Almost none.
Almost all, you know, like, did they do any hay?
There were
haying or
shepherds in the field, like guys walking around looking after the animals, and we saw tents where they would sleep at night. And
There were donkeys pulling the plows. I actually saw 2 burros, donkeys or whatever, pulling a plow, and that's how they did it. And they're one of the main modes of transportation that we saw were the donkeys, the little burros, and they weren't very big. They were just, you know, their backs sometimes were barely higher than the back of a pew here, and that's how people got around.
Who needs an electric car?
Yeah, now, of course, you get into the city and you see much more modern stuff. But even then, every once in a while, we'd see a donkey cart in the city. But, yeah, out in the, like, farms were not big corporate, conglomerate, massive, multi-billion acre farms. They were small family farms. We did see some small tractors, and by small tractors, I mean, like, you know, minivan-sized tractors. But even those were pretty rare. We saw a lot of people out in the fields working by hand.
Any kind of walk-behind tractors, like where they had big handlebars out the back and they would maybe be cutting something or dragging a little plow or something? No?
No,
Okay.
very, very little mechanical work.
Boy,
They
what a
used-
difference between us here and our agriculture, our big agriculture, and that way of producing food. Just phenomenal.
Sorry, Michael, you had your hand up there?
It sounds like a lot of the people were quite self-sufficient and hardworking. From what you know and what you experienced, is there very much in the way of some poverty or inequity that you knew of, or is it fairly well balanced?
So the country as a whole isn't doing too bad. It's the 5th largest economy in Africa, and it does quite well. Having said that, there is 25–30% unemployment, and you get out into the more rural areas, and those people live very humbly. In the northeast in the Rift Mountains, they grow marijuana. And Morocco is they supply, I think, 80% of the marijuana and the hashish that you find in Europe. Now, it's not, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in Islam, but as I understand it, it's not permitted to use if you belong to the faith. But the government doesn't do anything about the fact that they know people openly grow it and export it illegally into Europe because it's a way for them to make money, right? And that is a big part of the income in that part of the country, is growing drugs. So I didn't see anything stronger than that. I'm sure it exists. But even alcohol was, I mean, not that I know personally, I've heard alcohol is very hard to come by in Morocco. We did stop at one place in Eritrea. It was a hotel that had a bar, and if you've ever walked by a hotel bar, you normally see 800 bottles up on the bar. This bar had 3 bottles on the shelf. So alcohol apparently is very expensive, taxed very highly. Not technically illegal, but highly discouraged. So yes, but back to your question, a lot of poverty out in the rural areas. But the one thing I found was fascinating was everyone kind of had a place. And here's a good example. We went to see a park where the God's Bridge was. Mm-hmm. It's this thing they advertise as the God's Bridge. It's apparently this beautiful bridge that goes over a river, and it's in a national park, right? So we pull up to the national park and we go in, and you park your vehicle. And there's a guy there. And you give the guy 1 dinar, and he'll guard your car. He's not employed by the park. He's not employed, but he's there, and he's providing a service, and you give him a dinar. That's how he makes his money. Then there's other guy that comes up to you and goes, hey, come with me, I'll be your tour guide, and I'll show you through the park. And you pay him, 50 dinar, right? And that's how he makes his money. And so you're walking through the park, and there's this guy, and he's got a couple plastic lawn chairs and a card table and a charcoal fire, and he's there making some tagine, and you sit down at the table and he feeds you food. And that's how he makes his money, right? And then lots of that. We were in Fez, we saw the same thing. There was a parking lot where you pay some guy, a dinar, he'll watch your vehicle overnight. There's another guy and you pay him a couple dinar and he'll carry your luggage from the parking lot to the hotel. And so people are very resourceful, entrepreneurial like that, right? So they don't have an actual job, but that's what they do. And so, from a North American perspective, it seems kind of odd that you get these people just kind of coming up to you wanting money for these little services that you may or may not need. But that's part of how they individually combat poverty.
Well, so in whatever part of Morocco, the marijuana is the industry, is the crop, but what else grows and where does it grow and how is it like? They must have a good supply of corn, right, for their wraps and...
It was early in the agricultural year, so I saw people working fields, but I'm not sure what they were planting or what they were growing there. But there were lots of markets with lots of fresh stuff available, and a lot of people raised animals. And so, stereotypically, you ride down the road, you come around a corner, and there's a flock of sheep in the middle of the road, right? There were sheep and there were goats. Didn't see a lot of cows. So, 3-5% maybe the animals we saw were cows, but tons of sheep and tons of goats.
Cows don't do well in mountains and stony terrain. That's terrible on their hoofs and their bodies. You have sheep, goats, donkeys. They're more adapters. They're smaller creatures, right? But poor cows on slopes like that. That's tragedy for them.
We did see hills and hills of olive trees, and we did see some small manufacturing areas of, producing it into olive oil. Mm-hmm. And we'd look off into the hills, and they'd be rolling hills, like, in the distance, and we could tell the olive trees were all planted. Like, at first we thought it was random, but as we got closer and closer, they were all planted in lines. Thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of olive trees, because they're a very distinct tree. Once you've seen one, you know what you're looking at. And it felt like a lot of the country was covered in olive trees.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the one town of Volubilis I mentioned earlier where there were Roman ruins, Volubilis was on the very edge of the Roman Empire. And Volubilis was actually a fairly wealthy city, 1,800 years ago or 2,000 years ago, because they produced olive oil. And so from the area around, they grew olives, and they had presses there where they press and make olive oil for shipping throughout the Roman Empire.
So is it still an industry?
Well, not in Volubilis, no. But
in
yes.
Morocco, olives are a big deal. Olives and olive oil are a big deal in Morocco, yes.
Yeah.
So I saw on Facebook when you guys arrived at the Rock of Gibraltar. What was that like for you guys to experience that?
Gibraltar was special for me for a couple of reasons. My dad was in the Navy, back in the early 60s, and that was one of the stories he told me of when he went to Gibraltar and, explored Gibraltar and apparently had his hat stolen by a monkey, right? Or not a monkey, it's the Barbary apes. So he had his hat stolen by an ape. So when we got to Gibraltar, I was very conscious to make sure there was nothing that could be taken. And so that was special for me because I could tie in with my dad having shared his experience. By the time we got to Gibraltar, I was not doing as well as I had for most of the trip. For those of you who don't know, I've been dealing with a kidney stone, which is misery at the best of times. And so the day we were in Gibraltar, it was not a great day for me, so I didn't hike as far and as hard as I wanted to. But getting up on the top of the rock, the view was just incredible. And in fact, if I scroll back here far enough, there's this picture here.
Yeah.
This is on Gibraltar. And so that's the Port of Gibraltar is here. Port of Algeciras is over here. And here we are with some Barbary apes.
Emily's going to say, oh.
Yes, and these guys are pretty smart. We watched a few of them, go up and steal things from other people, and just how they'd interact with folks. There was a kid who or adult had a push stroller, and one of the apes came up and stole some of the infant's food out of the bottom of it and took off. And of course, no one wants to fight the ape for it because the ape is, potentially vicious. And watched one ape jump from a ledge, bounce off the head of one of the security guards, and keep going.
That's an illusion. I'm probably about 8 or 9 feet away because I was scared to get too close to them.
Did you ever use your cell phones or see anyone using their cell phones?
Cell phones. Oh, okay, you brought that up. So
That's a good question.
we got into Morocco, and we both had unlocked our phones before we went, and wanted to make sure we had the ability to communicate, right, just in case. And so we went down to Morocco Telecom and got ourselves a couple SIM cards. And each SIM card cost us $2.80, I think. And it gave us, minimal talk time. And then we bought ourselves 50 dinar worth of data, and that was about $7 worth of data. It was 5 gigabytes. And with the exception, I think, of one location way up in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, we had 4-bar cell service everywhere. And so that's how I was able to communicate. I didn't even bother trying to sign into Wi-Fi half the time because I had amazing cell service.
It was kind of unusual to watch. You'd be in the fields or in the mountain with the sheep and the shepherds, and they'd be standing there looking at their cell phone. And you're in the middle of, I shouldn't say middle of nowhere, obviously they came from somewhere, but it was incongruent. It was unusual to see that modern technology in such a, thousands of year old type job. So it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, they had a very well-developed, from our experience where we traveled, very well-developed cellular network, and all 4G, I think. Yeah, we had great cell service.
Are there any other wild animals except monkeys, like maybe snakes or something that you saw? Or?
We saw a couple lizards skittering across the road. Don't recall seeing any snakes.
No snakes. I didn't see any scorpions. I didn't see any spiders. I wasn't bitten by any bugs. But
You're right. That's the one thing that I was totally blown away by. Didn't see any bugs.
I saw two cockroaches.
Okay, 2 whole cockroaches in the entire month, right?
Yeah.
And maybe a couple flies.
We saw flies in the market because if there was either the meat or if it was a confectioner, maybe a bakery who had lots of sweets, we would see maybe wasps or flies or something, circling. But other than that, it was amazing to not be bothered by the whole insect world in a theoretically hot country. It was cold for them too.
Yeah, maybe it gets worse in the summer. I don't know. But that was one of the things I was expecting and I didn't see.
Did you ever get bored?
So, Angela and I discussed this, and we quickly determined that this was not a vacation. This was an adventure. It wasn't a vacation, it was an experience, right? And that's what we had kind of built it as. And so every day there was a new challenge. Every day there was something different that we had to deal with, right? I think Angela stretched her borders of comfort quite a bit. But boredom? I don't think there was a second where we were bored.
In the evenings, I could just keep myself busy by reliving those terrifying moments of riding through the Atlas Mountains and having a cliff going straight up on one side of me, and then the road being about 6 feet wide with maybe like 2.5 feet of pavement with potholes, and then having a sheer drop on the other side. They don't use guardrails. So I'd be, in the evening, I'm going, thank you, Jesus, one more day, thank you, Jesus, that I got through.
Yeah. We would get to our destination, we'd unpack, maybe take a shower, we'd get something to eat, and then sometimes in the evening, I'd sit down and I'd type out the evening's message on the cell phone. Then I'd read it to Angela, and she'd give me her input, and then post the pictures, and by the time we were done that, it was time to go to sleep. But it was tiring. A lot of that riding it's not like driving a car. It's very physical. So each night we were usually pretty tired.
What was the drinking water like?
So we drank almost exclusively bottled water. And bottled water was available everywhere. And despite what you hear, and I'm sure it does exist where people just take old bottles and fill them up and then put new caps on them, we were pretty confident we didn't find that anywhere we went. We have, have you ever heard of Life Straw? Okay, so we've got these water bottles that have a Life Straw integrated into them. And so anytime, even when we bought bottled water, we'd pour it in there and drink it through the Life Straw. When we were in Chefchaouen, we drank tap water there, and the folks in the home there told us the water was pure, it came from the mountains, and there was no issues. But that was the only time we drank tap water. And didn't notice any deleterious effects from that. But otherwise, generally, yeah, I've learned over time, always be cautious with your water, and so that's why we had the Life Straw and the filters, and that worked. But access to water was never an issue. There was bottled water everywhere, and it's not very good for the environment, I'll give you that. But we always carried at least 2 or 3 liters, 2 liters anyway per person. Had a nice big bottle, our water jugs were filled up, so that if we were to find ourselves in that kind of position, we'd be okay.
Did you read local newspapers? And if so, did you use the motorcycle trick when you're cold? You stuff newspapers up your pant legs to keep warm?
Didn't get to that point. I was never that cold. But I'm fatter than Angela, so that's probably.
You call me fat? No.
So my clothing was a little bit better than Angela's. So I was warm enough. But no, didn't read any of the local papers. In fact, I was in a black hole for news almost, except whatever I saw on Facebook. I think maybe by the time we got to Gibraltar, I started listening to the news again. Mm-hmm. Oh no, where were we? We were in Chefchaouen, that's right. And when we picked up, so there was a strike that happened in Portugal. It was all the truckers went on strike, which resulted in them not being able to deliver fuel. And so we had the friends we were meeting up with were in Lisbon at the time, and they were telling us that there was no gas available, and the gas stations that had gas were running out and they were closing. And so as we're driving closer and closer to Portugal, I was worried we were going to get stuck because there was no easy way to get into Portugal to drop the bikes without driving far enough that we'd run out of fuel. Fortunately, the strike ended the day before we got to Portugal, and so we were able to survive and get there. But yeah, we weren't tracking much in the way of news except for the fuel strike in Portugal. The Azores? No, and unfortunately, you'd think 3 weeks or 4 weeks would be enough time, But there's so much we didn't see. And this was, so we've discussed this ahead of time, and one of the things I'd like to do when I retire is have no itinerary. Just get up and go. And today we're going to go this way, today we're going to go that. There's someplace over there, we'll get there in a day or a week or who cares. Doesn't matter, right? Because time doesn't mean anything and we'll just drive. And we wanted to approach this trip that way, but we quickly realized that we just flat out didn't have enough time. And so we sat down and we planned our route to be the most efficient route. And so there was a ton of the country that we couldn't get to see. Most of the Atlantic coast we missed out on. Personally, I would have loved to have gotten down into Western Sahara, but we couldn't get close to that. So, yeah, and there was no chance we were going to get to the Azores, not with the motorcycles.
I'm so impressed, Michael. You're so brave, and Angela, to go that place. Like you've seen the picture, like there's nobody there except you and Angela and that guy there. I think I would be scared to go there, what you did there. But, you're so brave. My question is also, is there any Adventist school there? I guess not, eh? Or
No.
a hospital?
No.
Yeah?
No, no school. And to my knowledge, there's no hospital. There's no official Adventist footprint in the country. There were, that I met personally or know of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, call it 6, either people or families that were sent there as missionaries. And that's the extent of the Adventist Church's footprint. In fact, we have a pastor here in British Columbia whose name escapes me now. Ford, I think his last name is. And I believe he lives in Creston or somewhere around there. He used to be the guy that was the head representative in Morocco. But he's since left and he's now living in Creston, Castlegar, some sea town in BC somewhere. So, yeah. So right now, it's literally one-on-one friendship evangelism that's happening there. And the number of Adventists, you could probably name them all if you knew them all. The maybe 100, 150, based on who we saw. Not a very big footprint. But I am proud to say that what I saw there, the Adventists that were there, were active. Not only active in attending services, and they're all home churches, but active in witnessing to the best of their ability. And the missionaries that were there were active in ministering to other Adventists and encouraging them and empowering them to be a witness. And so that bodes well for spreading Christianity. All right. Does anyone else have any questions? I got 800 more pictures I'd be happy to show you, but it's already 8:20, and I think there are some people who might want to get to the gym night. That starts in about 20 minutes. Good for another Vespers. Yeah, I didn't want to just stand up here and show you a bunch of pictures, as interesting as it was for me. But one of the things I want you to take away is the fact that there's a big contrast between here in North America and in Morocco and elsewhere with regards to how the church functions. And so when we take up offering for mission projects, when we take up offering for Sabbath school, the projects that we advertise through Sabbath school, the 13th Sabbath offering and so forth, I saw the people who were the end result of some of the money that we donate actually out doing the work. And that's impressive. Especially, I mean, it's one thing to go out here and evangelize and people don't want to listen to you, they close the door or whatever. But the people who are working in Morocco are actively putting themselves on the line in a very real sense and putting themselves out there to be discriminated against, to be persecuted, to deal with stuff that we don't have to deal with here. And so that's something I wanted to leave you with, so you can appreciate that we've got it pretty good here.
Were there like malls or clothing stores or something like that there?
Malls and clothing stores. We spend a lot of time in local markets, medinas and souks. Malls, did we see any? I can't remember.
There weren't many. In the big cities, Casablanca, Rabat, there probably were, but it wasn't something we were interested in. Being on a motorcycle, there wasn't really much shopping to be done because we couldn't haul it around with us. It's probably a good thing. No big carpet or anything that we bring back.
A lot of small, like really small businesses. But yeah, I don't remember seeing any mall. We went to a mall in Portugal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no.
Question,
Oh.
the gear that you took, what did you change? Boots, gloves, anything that you changed?
I had all of my summer gear with me. So I had vented gloves, the kind that if it was so hot, they had scoops on them to grab that and pull your hands off. I'm so cold. Oh. I would be hanging onto the handlebar through the Atlas Mountains. I'd be holding on, and then we'd stop, and then oh, I gotta get the microphone. I'd be hanging onto the handlebar, and we'd stop, and then I'd have to put my feet down, and I'd have to wait until I could undo my fingers and pull them off. So I would have had 2 sets of gloves, because I just bought a new set. They're at home, didn't bring them. The other thing I would have done is my wedding boots, my motorcycle boots, were perforated leather. Michael had great boots. He had, waterproof boots. So you can't bring everything with you. You have to decide, how best to pack and have it compact. So when we do our retirement tour, I'll make sure I bring extras of things. And I had what was my jacket? It was
a mesh jacket.
It was a mesh jacket. So it's meant for in the summer. The air comes right through. So I thought Morocco was going to be hot. Do you guys not think that Morocco sounds like a hot place? Not in April and May.
Well, yeah, in the summertime, it can get crazy hot.
Yeah, it would. It would in the desert. Yeah. So we did our research. We went on Google. We looked at the average temperatures. We thought we were well informed. And then I looked at those extra set of gloves, and I thought, yeah, it's too much room. Threw them over my shoulder, didn't bring them. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd second that. Definitely a second pair of gloves, because I brought my summer gloves as well. And when it didn't rain that often, which I was very grateful for, but the couple days it did rain, yeah, it was misery. So I'd bring a second pair of gloves. My jacket, the jacket I had a rain shell that went with it, and I could put those down puffy jackets. So I actually took the thermal liner out of my jacket. It came with a thermal liner, and I wore the puffy down jacket instead, because then I could use that as a going out jacket as well. And so with those 3 layers, plus I had a merino wool shirt and a t-shirt, I was warm enough. I had 2 merino wool shirts. I think I would trade out one of the merino wool shirts for a light fleece or something that was in between a merino shirt and the down jacket, just to give me a little bit more flexibility. My pants were great. I've got a rain liner that goes in my pants. They're mesh pants. So the pants worked just fine for me. The boots were awesome. And I love my helmet. So yeah, really the only thing would be another warm layer, or change out one of mine, and then the second pair of gloves. Easily the second pair of gloves was the one piece of gear that we wish we had brought for riding gear.
Second question, the electronics between your helmets, would you change that, or any problems with those?
We've owned that set of comms gear for 4 years, and we love it. Works great, and I will be unhappy when they finally do fail, because nothing lasts forever. But yeah, we've got a pair of Scala. Everyone loves Senna, and I haven't used Senna, so I can't comment on it. But we've got Scala comm gear, and it works great. We've got it's all line of sight. And so when we were up in the mountains and we were doing these switchbacks, every once in a while I'd go around a corner and we'd lose comms, but that's the same with any comm system. But yeah, we had over a mile, as long as it was line of sight. So yeah, I wouldn't change that at all. So.
Just have one question, Michael.
Sorry, we got one over here. She's been patiently waiting.
I just wondered if you could be a little bit more specific as to what difficulties the missionaries have when they go out to do whatever they do, interact with the locals.
I'll be honest, I can't provide specifics because no one provided the specifics to me. There was just a general atmosphere of challenge in a culture that was Muslim. And it wasn't cultural Muslim. It was, you know, the very first video I showed you there with the call to prayer, 5 times a day, no matter where you were, if you were near a population, there was a mosque and there was a call to prayer. And the last night we were in Morocco, in Tangier, we were on the 6th floor of a building, and we were at the same level as the speaker for the mosque that was across the courtyard. And yeah, so we were up early every morning. In a country where everybody is Muslim, they're not tolerant, or as tolerant as you'd like them to be, for you being in the minority. So that, I suppose, is a good experience, because, you know, being a white guy, I'm not in the minority anywhere, at least here. And so over there I get a chance to, you know, have some small idea of what it might be like to be a minority. So I didn't have any trouble, and I looked to make sure I didn't cause any trouble for any of the folks that I was communicating with. But no, in answer to your question, sorry, I can't give you any specifics.
Carry Bibles, it's okay like that, or you should not be, I don't know.
Most everyone that I saw at church were using their cell phones and had Bibles on their cell phones. So that's, I guess, one way to not have any concerns with that. So yeah, I didn't see anyone carrying any.
I was just thinking, like, if you've seen a carrying Bible, you'll be persecuted, and this is a Muslim area.
Yeah, so I would expect if anyone had a Bible, they'd probably throw it in a backpack or a bag of some sort of purse to carry it so that it wouldn't be out in the open.
I see. So it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Ildeco's asking, how did we actually figure out where to go? Like those roads and those highways, how did we do that?
Well, so I did all the planning, and I did all the route planning ahead of time. So I would pick the 2 points that I'd start and end from, and I'd start with Google Maps. And Google Maps would give me the most efficient road, and then I'd look and I'd go, that's a highway, I don't want to do that. And so then I'd drag the lines over to take secondary roads. Because there were times when we could have driven on better roads, but that's not fun, that's just work. So I wanted to get off the main highways and get onto some secondary roads. And there was a couple times where we were literally driving on the access road beside the highway because it was nicer. You know? And there was nobody else out there. Mm-hmm. We had hardly no problems, except for in the cities, we had no problems with traffic. The cities were a whole nother experience altogether.
Left or right side?
Right side. But that didn't matter so much sometimes. In the cities, it was a perpetual game of chicken in the cities. Traffic circles are everywhere, and you know, I quickly learned that, you know, you find a hole that's about the size of your bike, you put your bike in it. And that's just how you ride. And here, you know, in Canada, where we have the lowest population density anywhere, and we like having our space, like, look, everyone's scattered all around here, right? We like having our space. You leave, you know, a polite gap, and 2 people will fit in there, right? So you have to ride the bumper of the guy in front of you, which it takes a little bit of getting used to. But yeah, lane filtering, yeah, just go for it. It was freeing once you could wrap your head around how they drive there. And nobody ever got angry, right? You cut somebody off, who cares? You're all going the same way and you're all doing 30 kilometers an hour, right, in the city. But yeah, you know, I knew I had arrived in learning how to drive in Morocco. When I was in the left lane on the motorcycle, there was a truck in the right lane beside me. I made a right-hand turn, sorry. At the same time, he made a left-hand turn. And we didn't hit each other. I don't know how. But it's just, you just drive. Inshallah, yeah.
Michael, besides that you guys are brave, I felt that God were with you guys. This is, for me, is scary. It's kind of scary adventure, really, and I felt that God were with you.
Well, it was as I said earlier, it was a training mission, if you will, for us to help us prepare for what's to come. And so we certainly learned a lot on the trip. And I know we were blessed with just tons of positive experiences, right? The ability to enjoy nature, to meet people, to share from ourselves, and to better prepare so that when we do our retirement trip, that we'll be better prepared as we leapfrog from project to project, that we can sustain ourselves for a period of time doing that. So it'll be quite the adventure. Bye, Kaylin. All right. If there are no other questions, let's close now then. I'll happily stick around if anyone has any other questions, but we can close now. And for those of you who are interested in getting to gym night, it starts shortly. So thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed coming along with us, both through Facebook and tonight. And I encourage you, if you want a challenge, to go and be a missionary in a country where Christianity isn't welcome. And if you're not up to that challenge, then do your part. Take the opportunities that come before you to support those missionaries that do go and spread the gospel in those lands that are far from here. So on that note, I invite you to bow your heads with us and let us pray. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you so much for the privilege we have to be able to come here in peace and safety and to worship as we choose, when we choose, how we choose. Lord, I pray that as we close the Sabbath, that you would be with our brothers and sisters around the world, in Morocco, in Sudan, in all the countries where you're not welcome. And I pray that you would empower those missionaries to have the courage and the resources and the strength to share your word, to share the truth of your love. And I pray that you would bless them with safety and protection, that as they do your work, Lord, they could be effective, and that they could have the courage, in spite of the challenges put on them by the culture, by the government, by the prevailing and negative opinion of Christianity, Lord, that they could continue to serve you and to spread your word, so that when you come, heaven can be a crowded place. Help us, Lord, whether it's by doing the mission work or supporting the missionaries, to help forward your gospel throughout this world. We thank you, Lord, for the new week that is about to begin, and for all the blessings that we know we can look forward to, and the opportunities we can look forward to serve you and to share your love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.